Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Monday, October 28th. Like so often, it does feel like the months jump by pretty quickly. For me, I guess the good news is that as we wait here to see if we're going to have network trouble or not, while I still am deep into what seems like it's going to go on forever medium emergency that is significantly destroying my ability to make content, at least the house remodeling secondary emergency is now pretty wrapped up. Although moving furniture back into that room, cleaning the room after all the mess that was done to it, suffice it to say, I will keep it short and sweet and say I dealt with several different groups of people, which I will say is a mistake. You should have one contractor. If they are subcontracting, it doesn't matter, but you need one person who's going to be responsible for everything instead of having 2 or 3 groups of people who can do crappy jobs and blame it on somebody else. And even if you had one contractor that is supposed to be responsible for everything, they still very possibly will blame it on the last person that worked on the house, the person that built the house, any number of other excuses. The stereotype of repairman contractors being kind of scummy and scumbags is there for a reason, in my opinion. And I do certainly have high standards, and know that you're not going to get a perfect house, but it kind of sucks when you're getting about 30% of what you would expect and you're still being charged a premium for it. And yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that, but I'm not very satisfied with the quality of the work but it got done. It's really a case where my house in particular is too old to be doing anything to it. It has basically one more sale in it, at which point whoever buys the house at that point is going to either let it fall apart or demolish it to build a whole new house on the foundation, or even the foundation there probably needs to be improved. So I am noticing that we are dropping network packets once again, that I am just not getting anywhere close to the amount of data going through as I used to on YouTube. And so I'm gonna just try something. Like I don't think we can actually change any of this at the moment, but yeah, I'm getting like 2 megabits per second. It was in like I was doing 6.5 megabits per second before on the streaming. I tried to just turn down the quality. So let's see if we can just change things on the fly and see what that does. I don't know if you can even do that with YouTube. Inherently something changed. Either the settings changed and that really wasn't the quality that was going before, or YouTube or my internet service provider is just actively throttling the uploads speeds. But yeah, nothing seems to be fixing it. It's even changing that really didn't even get the numbers lower. Getting it down to 3 megabits per second is still not going to be high enough. Like, I would have to go to a paltry 1.5 megabits per second to even get it within the range of what seems like is getting pushed through. But yeah, it like jumps down to 500 kilobits per second. I'm sure this is all very interesting. But yeah. It's just not working. I just don't think there's anything else we can really do. Just keep on turning that number down. Turn down the quality of the stream, the preset of the encoder settings. So yeah, if I've changed anything at all, which I'm not sure I really have, that I've just like drastically reduced the amount of quality that is streaming, and it still just doesn't seem like it's working. Alright, so yeah, those are my two latest things. One of the things with the room remodels, I bought these smart curtains, and then I stupidly made several mistakes, I think, when modifying them to have smart motors in them instead of just that you buy roller shades that are just regular roller shades, and then you modify them with a motor to make them smart. But I turned the shades inside out, which the shades have a bit of stretch in them that they adjust for on the pole by putting stickers. And by turning the shades completely around, taking them off the pole, turning them around, and then putting back on the pole, I've undone that balancing that was automatically there. And so once the shades were hung, and these, because they're smart shades, have to be very level. Shades in general have to be perfectly level, which my handyman seemed to not really understand. But yeah, if they're not perfectly level, they will bunch up and start fraying the edges of the shades because there's not a lot of seam or protection there, and so it will slide to one side or the other if it's not perfectly set up. So I'm gonna have to take it apart, undo that, hope that fixes everything. I also put the micro USB plug for the solar panels to charge the motors that have a battery on them pointing backwards. That turned out to be a real mistake because it is just really difficult to plug it in, and also there's a synchronizing button that is impossible to hit if it is pointing backwards, because you basically have to stick a pin in it or a knife in it to hit the pin to synchronize it, and synchronize it to a radio frequency remote, synchronize it to the Wi-Fi connector dongle. So yeah, that is another thing that I made a mistake with. Too ambitious, certainly, and that is commonly the problem. Is I try to be very ambitious. I had this whole exhaust intake fan that was going to be installed, and people didn't like it being installed through the wall. The handyman didn't want to do it. Other people told me it was a bad idea. The fan, in fairness, is supposed to be closer to 6 feet off the wall, and I was going to put it down half a foot off the wall because there was a cat door hole. And so the idea was, well, the hole was already halfway there, why not just expand it and put something functional there? But yeah, so now I have this fan that I've wired and chopped up, and no use for it other than sticking another hole in the wall somewhere, which maybe I will do, maybe I won't. We'll just see how far I get with that. Or I'll probably have somebody else do it, not me try and do it. But one of the things there was I was going to try and put a AC 120 volt solenoid, which they do make 120 volt AC solenoids on rare occasion, to pull the shutter flaps open when it's in intake mode, because it will try and pull the shutter flaps closed in intake mode and then only really pull in a small amount of air around the cracks. But the one I ordered was too small, basically a toy size, and I needed one that was about 25% bigger, or one that would just have about 2 or 3 times the amount of throw, in the sense that how far does the solenoid rod go up and down. I don't think the one I have now would work unless I introduced some pulley system or pivot system. It would be a lot of work to figure that out, to get it to multiply the distance based on more force. And generally that's the opposite of what a pulley is. A pulley uses a rope to multiply the force by increasing the distance. I don't think a pulley, I can't think of a way to use a pulley to make it do the opposite. Yeah, this is not getting any better. One of the things is it's on a variable bit rate, and maybe it should just be on a constant bit rate. I just want to constantly mess with this. Constant bit rate at 1000 kilobits per second. See if that does anything. Nope, doesn't seem like it is. I am playing Torchlight 2, and I do feel like this is helping me get back into the process as we scroll down these 24-hour concurrent games here. Metaphor Refantasio still kind of high, but not gonna break into the top 10 at this rate. Playing Torchlight 2 on easy makes it a much easier experience. Arguably, maybe I should be playing something like Diablo 4, but I still just don't like the idea of the seasons resetting and a game that really just wants you to play it over and over again with different character classes. And that is a thing that I think all of these games, Torchlight 2 in particular, are missing, is that it would be nice if you could just change classes at any point, transfer your levels over to a different character class, and experiment there. It's basically to the point where the game should probably force you to do that. I'd also say the procedural generation of the level design in Torchlight 2 is pretty awful. It's very stringy levels in that you get into one area and go north for far too long, then you find out that that is the stairs up, and you realize you haven't seen any of the south of the map, so then you have to backtrack all the way to the middle of the map where you started and go south, and then you go all the way to south and you find that there's maybe a chest or two, and then you have to backtrack all the way from the south back all the way through the center to the north. And it's just not, it's very obvious in the level design that it's not doing a great job of Lego blocking different sections together, even like Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 did. It is much more random and much more natural, and it just obviously has no artist's hand behind it to make it make sense. There's also some verticality there, so on the map it may look like the two areas are connected and you can just easily cross, but when you actually get there, one is several feet lower than the other and there's just no way up. even the automatic pathfinding in the game is unable to make sense of the procedurally generated level design. And I have no idea if the level, well, for really, I'm not 100% sure it actually is procedurally generated, but it definitely feels like that. But I also have no idea if it's procedurally generated at compiled time, in the sense that if I was to play the game a second time, would the level layout be exactly the same? Or I would assume it's procedurally generated each time you start a new character. It definitely would make the game severely less playable if the level layout and dungeon layout was the same every single time. But then you get into the problem of the Diablo-like games also, where the gameplay loop is just this kind of mindless loop, and that's what you're there for, just clicking a lot, clicking far too much. I kind of wish you'd be able to turn on an auto attack where you would just attack anybody slightly close to you, and the pets in Torchlight 2 attack that way, so obviously the code is there to do that. And so you could just click to go into this area and then auto attack enemies. Although there is a wide difference between boss characters in Torchlight 2 who you have to actually focus on and right click and left click on, and then the weaker minions even of the boss fights who just die in 2 or 3 hits, at least on easy mode. Easy mode probably being too easy. But then you go through that loop of mindlessly killing things, and you get gold and you get items, and for the most part all of the items can't be that unique or special because you're just not guaranteed to get them. I don't think in Torchlight 2 you get drops specifically from storyline boss characters that are really important. And so there's just a lot of vendor trash for those types of games. That's just part of the loop, and they don't really give you enough space, and they don't give you the ability to like teleport items you want to keep back to your home base. But in Torchlight you can give items to your pet and have them run to the city and sell items, which half alleviates that problem, but it's still not enough space. I would have liked to see Torchlight 2 have twice as much space and several newer features compared to Torchlight 1, instead of it feeling pretty much just more of the same of Torchlight 1. It probably has some small improvements, but I would also make the argument that Diablo 4 probably has very little improvements over Diablo 3, which I think probably had very little improvements over Diablo 2. And so I am much more interested in potentially playing Diablo 1 again and just going back for that throwback and nostalgic experience than I would be playing Diablo 4. And for a YouTube content creator, certainly I would love to go through all the Diablo games over the course of several years, assuming I can even maintain a YouTube channel over the course of several years at this rate. But yeah, there is an artificial high as far as the player base in Diablo, in that you kind of have to stick with the game in one season, otherwise your character is just going to disappear. And you can see that the peak on Diablo 4 on Steam in particular was only 55,000 players as far as the maximum peak. Compare that to just Hogwarts Legacy, which was 879,000 players. That being said, if I was to very carefully go up and down this list, I don't think the other games that are less name recognizable are on this list, because there is another game that for a long time was beating out Diablo 3 in popularity, and may still even be beating out Diablo 4 in popularity for the people who know it, but it just didn't have that advertising push and name recognition, so it's not at the top of this list. You could probably say that for a lot of games. And that Binding of Isaac, which I reference quite a bit as one of my favorite games, is perhaps one of the few games that is just so weird and so different that it doesn't have a also-ran style of game that could beat it out by just out advertising it. Like, somebody could do that, just nobody did do that. Then my chart is continuing to stay fairly consistent as far as the top most relevant games so far. Then the Warner Brothers publisher sale on Steam is still going on. DC Universe Online. Interesting. I feel like this was one of those games that went down for a while and then they brought it back. But yeah, it's not particularly a new game. Yeah, RuneScape might be a Diablo-esque game that's free to play, but I think it's kind of slightly different. Yeah, I don't think it really is a Diablo-esque type games. It's easy to confuse them. I've seen that Amazon Prime has some Like a Dragon live action show episodes, but I haven't built up the energy to actually try and watch it. I probably won't watch it. The Walking Dead franchise sale. Let's see what that really equates to, because I'd assume that's Telltale Walking Dead games that are in more of a remastered state. Seems like we are just going to consistently stay with the OLED Steam Deck advertisement branding with the red and black text. I imagine it was always their plan to stick with this new red and black text version of this banner art, and somebody just accidentally used the old white black bars with white or whatever it was before for the LCD versions in the last sale. Which, speaking of sales, if we are approaching Halloween and approaching November, that fall festival can't be too far away. Baller style. Although Valve and Steam seems to be one of the few companies that is open to not just having a sale for sake of being consistent. I guess Black Ops 6 is still being played, but you can see it's mixed reviewed. Steam Deck is back into the second spot. Factorio is falling down. In a lot of ways, this chart might be a more relevant chart than my chart is, as far as here are the games people are actually re-engaging with or engaging with for the first time, probably engaging with the first time by purchasing them, compared to some free-to-play games that, or games that have already been installed. At a certain point, whatever relevancy means is up for an opinion, and it might very well be the case that relevancy means more about who is buying what this week versus who is Back for Blood still mixed, who is playing something that they've been playing. Yeah. Although at a certain point that stops being a relevancy argument and that just is a top sales argument. Which, yeah. I probably need to make some kind of conversation on both points. As far as what is the game's what are the games people are buying versus what are the games people are playing. Because those two things are completely separate things, or fairly separate things. So the Walking Dead franchise sale would be definitive editions of the Walking Dead, which is $12, and then the starter pack would be, yeah, so I don't own the definitive edition, and you can see I already own the original versions, and that's kind of all they have. So it's kind of weird that they're even still promoting the original versions of The Walking Dead when the definitive edition should be the better version. Although I don't think the definitive edition actually changes too much, and that's a lot of game for $12.49, but you're only going to play it once. I also suspect that the servers to tell you who did what in the original games have been completely shut down. That was the case with the Guardians of the Galaxy Telltale game I last played, because the servers were just completely down, so you lose that social aspect of were your choices good or not. Telltale games, and The Walking Dead in particular, basically introduced this choices matter tag, which was a big thing for a while. Although if I was to click it now, I imagine very few games are going to be using that tag. Well, I bet a lot of people will be using the tag, but none of them are going to be ones that feel like that is as big of an emphasis. Things like Baldur's Gate 3, you will have choices and choices will matter, but also that is just not the default gameplay focus. So yeah, you can see you have a wide gambit of games. I'd say the Quarry probably is one of the games that where choices matter is best used as a tag. But notice how this is really just showing popular titles that happen to use that tag. So any small game that is using that tag is not getting promoted under this new tag system that Valve has, this relatively new tag system. So yeah, there is an unfairness here of the Vox Populi, the people, the general overwhelming number of people who play the bigger games dominating any tag, and any small or new game not getting anything from that. And you can see almost every new big game is going to have a ton of tags, and almost every game has a ton of tags. So as a consumer, if I want to look under the Choices Matter tag and see new games, I have no way of really doing that. Like, you would have to come all the way down here to all, which still has the majority of popular games here, and then you would have to click show more, and you would have to just continuously scroll down. And I suspect it would be a case where I would have to scroll down quite a bit before I saw anything that seemed like a slightly new game or a slightly independent game. Yeah. And so you can see how this is. Alright, 5 hearts under one roof is perhaps an independent game, and the casting of Frank Stone is slightly new. But yeah, you have to go through several tags. I have this game, I guess. Nope. This is a different Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not the Telltale one. It's just not a good way to scroll. And I guess New Tales from the Borderlands got removed from my wish list even by just being completely negative. It's mostly negative now. And that was a Telltale-like game too. Anyways, I'm kind of wasting time here. The Walking Dead, not relevant. It's worth pointing out, not relevant at all nowadays. The comic never got particularly popular after the TV season 1. The TV show was continuously funded by I believe it was TNT, who had really nothing else, and so they just went all in with the one thing that had been successful at one time, following previous outcomes, assuming the similar outcomes. But every episode, because they fired the writers after season 2, got worse and worse as far as I could tell, and the only people continuing to watch it were probably old people who would just stick with anything on TV, which is pretty much anybody on TV. Had The Walking Dead been on Netflix, it would have been canceled after season 1 or season 2. And as much as people complain about that, maybe it's for the better. Like, it's better to die quick than drag out and die slowly with multiple spin-offs and pathetic attempts to maintain its relevancy. Because the argument would be that if TNT had a finite amount of budget, which it probably did, by doubling down, tripling down with Talking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, and just more seasons of Walking Dead, all the budget spent on those spin-off shows, all the budget spent on making The Walking Dead go further, was budget that was not put into pilot programs to make a new series. It was budget that was not put into trying to make movies for TV, or even acquiring other content, other movies or TV shows to show. So yeah, Netflix may cancel things, but then Netflix does put a lot of that money back into making new things, for better or worse. Anyways, we're supposed to be talking about video game news, and this Monday seems like we don't have many Video Game Chronicles stories. So the former US boss says Japan studio's closure was sad but not surprising. It's tough when a studio hasn't had a hit for a while, says Sean Layton. Which, this I guess also is still just coming from Sean Layton. Talking probably out of turn. See, and this is one of the few things where I feel like silence clauses, I don't know if that's a real thing, but that probably should be a thing, or non-disclosure clauses should just be implemented, while non-disclosures usually make no sense whatsoever on an associate level. When you have a CEO just well, I guess it really should just be a non-disparagement clause. But yeah, when CEOs leave a business, they shouldn't really answer any questions or write books about it or anything, because you're just undercutting the new bosses. And I think Sean Layton in particular is probably doing this whether he means to or not, when he should just not be going on podcast or interviewing at all. He should be enjoying his retirement or seeking out other employment somewhere. And we've seen this happen with some of the other characters too, like Reiji Fils-Aimé. Mostly has been silent, but he has also shown up in a few places um, and said a few things, and just his presence alone being around here just hurts the fact that Doug Bowser, whose name is even hard to remember, is now in charge of Nintendo of America. Doug Bowser being particularly just non-imposing and quiet so far, perhaps because Nintendo of Japan really just wants their characters, Shigeru Miyamoto, to be the figureheads of Nintendo everywhere. Inherently, I would say that Sony has not put enough funding into making sure their studios can make good games. And I very rarely would believe that it is just, here's a company full of bad employees who have no good ideas and can't make a good game. You just don't stick around for after your first game if that's the case, if it's bad employees. I think the problem here is you have Sony acting as a publisher for its first party internal departments, and as a publisher they are not funding the development games and they are not approving projects. And at a certain point, if you own the company, if you own the first party studio, you probably just need to say yes to something. Otherwise the people are sitting around doing very little or nothing at all. And if anybody has any passion for anything, you should just say yes to that and just say, all right, well, how can we do this on a reasonable budget to keep people working and keep people excited? There definitely was a job I worked, and I won't go into too much detail or go too long on this, where there should have been a lot of enthusiasm around what was going on at the time. It was a TV station right around the time of the switch from analog TV to digital television, the first major HD over-the-air transition, the one where people with really old TVs would have to connect converter boxes, and there was even a whole rebate thing where you could get a converter box for free via tax rebate. And so it should have been a time of great enthusiasm. It should have been a time of great change, of things getting improved, things getting done. And in my experience at that job, at that TV station, none of that happened. There was no interest at all in changing anything. They were going to put as cheap of a piece of equipment as they could to just convert the analog signal to HD at the very end. That means the quality would not go up at all. It would just be upscaling in a very cheap way, a very bad way. And that was it. There was no excitement on, like, hey, we can get better content, we can broadcast, we can really make commercials about this and promote ourselves. None of that was happening, and that left me very disheartened around that job, and I left soon after that, because that was just part of a general negative vibe that job had anyways. But yeah, my point there being, you need enthusiasm in offices, and that's part of what a boss needs to do, is they need to be the cheerleader. And Sony, as a first party company, being the publisher for their first party development studio, Japan studio, should have been a cheerleader, should have been funding something. Of course, in Japan, they often like to just let people flail and fail, so that in the hopes that they will quit because of the union rules and just Japanese pride of not wanting to admit that they actually fire people, even though they force people to quit like crazy. So this statement from the former PlayStation US boss, which I think really he was Sean, unless I'm thinking of a different person, He was the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment at some point. No. Says he was CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment America and chairman of the Worldwide Studios. So this isn't even, I think, the most recent boss. I think this may be a boss or a lower level boss. Before the current two bosses that ran Sony Interactive Entertainment, there was a Western guy in charge. But now that we have two bosses and that they're Japanese based, nothing seems to really have happened at all. I won't even say things don't seem like they've changed. It just seems like nothing's happened. The censorship issue hasn't all of a sudden changed as far as games not being censored, or games that were censored previously being uncensored, which was a big issue. More games haven't been released, which is a much bigger issue, and certainly no kind of direction has been announced. So it feels like internally PlayStation is failing, and a lot of that may be that it doesn't have a lot of competition with the Xbox. A lot of that may be that they just don't feel like they need to do anything. But it's unimpressive. This whole year has been unimpressive as far as game releases. But it's particularly unimpressive when you have two new people in charge of PlayStation. It's crazy that it's two people in the first place, but and then they've just not said or done anything that I can even remember in the months that they've been assigned. So bad news for libraries trying to digitally preserve and rent out games. The U.S. Copyright Office has refused to allow remote access for out-of-print games. There has I think there was a bit of a precedent here that out-of-print books have been allowed to be remotely lent out, and even that is a fairly complicated system I think that libraries have been doing, in that they were only allowed to digitally rent out a book in kind of an ebook format for a 1-to-1 ratio of every physical book that they supposedly had. But yeah, the U.S. Copyright Office is probably made up of a bunch of older lawyer type people, and so they don't probably see the need to preserve video games as much as they see the need to preserve books in the same ways. And they also, I know, are hamstrung by things like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and hamstrung by just the current way laws are written. The definition of an out-of-print game would, in this case, if the Copyright Office was going to catch up with what lots of people are already doing personally, they would just have to start making a master list themselves of what they call out-of-print games. And I imagine the ESA would lobby heavily against every single game being added to that list, and it could be this complicated fight that happens in the same way that Disney fought to keep Mickey Mouse copyrighted for decades. The realistic thing would be to say that the NES version, a ROM of the NES version of Super Mario Brothers, is definitely out of print and not being made anymore. But Nintendo would come back and say, well, no, because we're taking that ROM and we're putting it through probably an open source emulator that we paid nothing for and put no effort into, and probably didn't even contribute any code back to the open source project. But we're taking that ROM, we're putting it through an emulator, and we're selling that ROM on our eShop, so it is in print. This, of course, would conveniently ignore the fact that there have been entire decades that the ROM for the Super Mario Brothers game, it has not been available for print, and once something goes out of print, it should just be considered out of print and abandoned at that point. And yeah, particularly for digital projects, I think the second something is not available for sale somewhere, you have to just draw the line there and say it is out of print, it's abandonware at that point. Maybe you could give a grace period of 6 months to a year, but yeah, you can't go decades and then remaster or just re-release, which Nintendo is really just re-releasing. The Video Game History Foundation was fighting for this and ESA lobbying, which it is a good argument to say ESA's lobbying, being a lobbying group at this point, probably spending a lot more money lobbying against libraries renting out games and fighting against just piracy than they are lobbying the US government to not censor video games, which is what they were originally established for, or lobbying for grants and charters so that games could be developed cheaper, or anything that would actually be beneficial to the actual gamer. Of course, the ESA is not trying to benefit the gamer, and they weren't designed to benefit the gamer. They were designed to benefit the pockets of game publishers. I saw some of this. The big part of this is the DMCA, and there's just nobody talking about revising or updating the DMCA or getting rid of the DMCA. Some of the response here was this quote here. Decided that both the single user and premise limitations should be kept intact to ensure fair use, to prevent market harm, and to avoid a significant risk that preserved video games would be used for recreational purposes instead of research. Which, yeah, inherently, if you are going to take that attitude that games are potentially going to be used for recreational purposes instead of research, and then it has to be research, that attitude will be something you can use to always deny this. Like, because anything inherently that would be a game could be used for a recreational purpose. And the lines blur extremely much as far as video games go. If I gave Super Mario Brothers as a ROM to a 10-year-old, yes, they would be using it for recreational purposes, but they'd also be using it for research purposes. Because for a 10-year-old, research is kind of knowing a history that happened before you were born. You can't disentangle that. And this is a really disingenuous argument, because if you were to give out an ebook, reading an ebook would also be for recreational purposes as well as research. If it is any kind of book that is in any way enjoyable, by this attitude, then the only kinds of ebooks that should be lent out would be incredibly dry educational books and science books, and like even a single joke on one line of text in one page of a 500-page book could still fall under this impossible hurdle that they are defining. And even if it was if it was just a book that printed out all the digits to pi, the first million digits to pi, or something like that, still you can make the argument that somebody out there finds that recreational and make that argument. It's far too opinionated. And at a certain point, I would also argue we can't just continue protectionist capitalism forever. You can't just say we are going to do everything to prevent market harm always. Things and decisions and the people's will has to just be implemented, and sometimes that might hurt the GDP a little bit, but it's the right thing because it's what the people voted for and what the people want. Inherently, it's crazy to say that your country is only about protecting the economics of your country to the extent that you would work employees to death or deny health care or deny time off or things like that. Like, because the market harm, the protected the GDP, gross domestic product argument, really is often the capitalists' last argument to just say we want to do something that is completely wrong morally or completely against the people's will, but we're going to argue we should do it anyways for money's sake. In the end, though, to not ramble too much on this, this is just the US Copyright Office kind of just maintaining the status quo, and as such the great era of piracy began, to quote One Piece, in that, yeah, the status quo also includes a lot of people out there just downloading ROMs through VPNs, through torrents, and the reality is, with each one of these protectionist decisions by a government, the government really is just losing the support of the people, and the people are going to do whatever they want. And inherently that was always the case. This is just prohibition all over again. Like, people who wanted alcohol still went through great lengths to get alcohol during prohibition. People did not stop drinking during prohibition. People will not stop playing games. The best way for video game companies to fight piracy would have been to make it easier and cheaper to just play them through easier systems. But even in the example of Super Mario Bros. ROM, running the ROM through the emulator in the eShop on the Nintendo Switch, from what I hear, is way worse of an experience than just running that ROM through RetroArch on a PC or a Steam Deck or a Raspberry Pi with RetroPie installed. Nintendo just didn't put the effort in to make it a better experience, to the point where you did have a lot of people jumping through hoops, spending a lot of time setting up RetroPie, which that's not easy by any means. There is also, I suppose, an argument to make that for NES games and Famicom games, those games are widely available in China on devices like crazy, so the copyright has failed to be protected worldwide by far. So the US copyright trying to protect specifically NES games is kind of ridiculous. But this really is just any game at all. One argument that could be made here is like Too Human. Too Human was ordered to be destroyed, and so the only people that really have copies of Too Human these days are collectors. So if collectors gave Too Human, a game that legally cannot be sold, that was ordered to be destroyed, I believe by a US judge, maybe it was a Canadian judge, either way, that game should be, if you're just going to hand pick games, that should be available to be rented out digitally. Like, there's just no way otherwise you would ever get it, so there's no market harm at all in that case. The Guy game is a slightly different argument, where the question becomes, because there was a underage person who I believe lied about their age, live action girl that's topless in that game, should that be preserved but never looked upon, or is there some value in actually being able to rent that out. And I guess in underage child pornography laws, that one would probably be preserved under lock and key and not looked upon. But then you get into the movies like Pretty Baby, where that movie basically definitely overly sexualizes a underage child, and yet there's an artistic value there that seems to exempt it from being censored against any laws, and you can buy Pretty Baby as a movie now. I don't think anybody would ever get in trouble for having that, so movies are being held to a different standard. The Guy game makes a harder argument to say it has enough of an artistic value, but it does have some, certainly. So yeah, I could see censorship laws being a problem, but Too Human is a much better argument to make, that there's no market harm there at all. That game can't be sold. There's several games like that. Neat. Moving on, Nintendo details Animal Crossing Pocket Camp complete. This is a paid version of a mobile game. Free-to-play version is ending in November, so effectively they're getting rid of a microtransaction free-to-play concept, which I guess was probably not making them much money. Probably because this is more of a game targeted to people not used to buying microtransactions, or younger people, and so now it's just a flat fee, which I kind of would like to see mobile games just starting to have a flat fee, because then the desire would be that the quality would go up more at that point. And so introductory $9.99 going up to $19.99, which is way too much. Even $10 is asking quite a bit for a mobile game. But yeah, I would like to see the standards of games go up. Speaking of mobile games, I can no longer report that I am playing Tinka Fuma as far as an adult mobile game. Something glitched in the data. For several days I could not load into it, and it was uniquely a thing, as far as I could tell, just to my mobile phone. So I wiped the data on Android, and when I wiped the data, I lost all my progress. I had never bothered to log in to an account on it to back up, do any kind of cloud backup. And yeah, I just didn't really want to put an email into Aeroslab and make an account there. That just seemed like, in these days, there's a tiny danger that having an email associated with an adult mobile game store might come back and bite you in the butt one way or the other. There are states in the United States already that are restricting porn sites, or trying to demand that you verify your age and identity, so you could potentially be tracked or hacked for going to porn sites. And yeah, it's probably only going to get worse and worse. Who knows? The US election is still a week away. We'll see what happens then, and maybe then I could rest easy not saying any political news for 4 years, hopefully, or very little of it. But yeah, so Tinka Fuma as a game, just as a final thought, if you want to play an adult game, it's not a terrible one. It's at its 3-year anniversary. It's pretty deep. You'd have a little bit of catching up to do over the course of a year or two. It's very possible, because it's 3 years old, that it won't last another year or two. But yeah, as far as day-to-day adult content in it, it's mostly just toplessness, except for in a few love-making scenes, which can be bottomless if you uncensor it. But yeah, I would say it is definitely hardcore, and a decent game on top of that. So that brings me back down to just playing the non-adult game Memento Mori and working on stopping playing the Card Captor Sakura game, which I'm taking large amounts of breaks in between playing the Card Captor Sakura game. I'll play it one day and then won't get back to it for several days. So inherently, by playing one fewer mobile game, I also am opening up potentially more time for me to get back to playing games that I can actually make content on, which there's an advantage there certainly too, in that if I get back to making content, then I just need to finally force myself to start scheduling content. And at this point I need to force myself anyways. January 1st is clearly the target in which I should just start to have some pre-recorded footage start airing again. And yeah, I just need to find enough time to start doing that and find the motivation to do that. Moving on, NVIDIA has overtaken Apple as the world's most valuable company. Supplying computer parts for AI development has fueled NVIDIA's surge. I think we probably are 5 to 10 years away from an argument being made to split up NVIDIA. It is too much power in one company's hand, and the US government in particular needs to realize that they've let far too many companies become far too big and far too influential on politics already. And you could easily draw a dividing line between NVIDIA in that you could have its chip manufacturing plants be one company and its video card division be a different company and its AI division be a different company. And so you could split it into 3 different companies pretty easily. NVIDIA is manufacturing more chips, I think, in the United States than Apple ever did, but who's to say NVIDIA wouldn't start to do much like Apple has done and start to have all of the assembly of iPhones done in China. There is a very good argument too that just a protectionist, isolationist mentality forcing Apple to make iPhones in the United States would have made iPhones way more expensive, but also would have made more jobs in the United States of a higher caliber. Inherently, if the only jobs left in the United States are low-level retail, service work, customer service work, and farming, which is often mostly done by immigrants because nobody in the United States really wants to work as farmers, then there just won't be that many jobs. And yes, there will be a disadvantage by having jobs where there are worker protections in the United States compared to China, where the Chinese employees sometimes are actual slaves but are treated basically like slaves. And that's true for many Asian countries where the workers work 90-hour-a-week, 100 hours a week jobs as standard and have severely less worker protections. But yeah, that's actually a good thing, that there would be more worker protections and that efficiency would go down. Efficiency as far as the worker has gone up like 400%, where the minimum wage has gone up barely anything at all. I won't throw a number out because I'll be wrong if I do. On a bigger level, if a single company is over $1 trillion, the United States government, and any government, in my opinion, should start taking 100% of your gross income over a single trillion. That there should just be a maximum cap of valuation, and this is usually by shareholder price, but the shareholder price itself would drop if there was just a maximum tax overall. It's ridiculous for a company to be over 1 trillion. It's ridiculous for any individual to be over $1 billion in the United States. You're not talking filthy rich at these numbers. You're talking 100% what you're doing is immoral. There's no way you get that much money without exploiting somebody, at the very least, rich. And the US government could come in, tax it at 100% for every dollar over $1 trillion, put that money into so many better programs that would work so much better overall. You could fund every single school lunch program in the United States, I'm sure, with $2.47 trillion. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could do that easily, year-round school lunches, and probably school breakfasts, and probably school dinners. And you could do it at a high quality where the food is actually good too and healthy. Meanwhile, video cards aren't even really NVIDIA's concern as much these days. And while my video card might do with a boost, it's certainly not the reason why I would build a new computer right now. The reason I'd build a new computer right now is more about just installing SteamOS if it ever gets released to be able to be installed on just a regular PC, or Bazzite instead as a SteamOS-like device, or maybe you install just a Linux, a version of Ubuntu or Debian with KDE. I would suggest KDE at this point because SteamOS is using KDE, and eventually you would just want to transition to SteamOS back. It's kind of not the best time to build a new computer. And building a new computer just to install a new operating system, just to have my main computer work, is fairly wasteful, but it wouldn't be impossible for me to really do that. It's kind of better to build a new computer while your current one is working, but the main pressure here is not new CPUs, because none of the new CPUs right now are particularly that good. Not new GPUs, because none of the new GPUs are particularly that powerful. What I would still be using a new GPU these days for wouldn't be to try to get any higher resolution. It would just be to do 1080p at a higher frame rate, more consistent frame rate, and to encode and decode like YouTube Shorts faster, which YouTube Shorts would actually be at a higher resolution. But the encoding and decoding may not even speed up at any amount if I got a newer video card. Mostly I would like things that are just stable. It's also worth pointing out that Linus Tech Tips just did a build of a PC of just finding like the best of the best of old hardware of any time compared to buying like the top of the line products today. And the old hardware computer did significantly better for the amount of money you spent. There was a couple problems certainly, but yeah, old hardware has not changed that much in a lot of ways. The NVMe SSDs, the top of the line ones that have not come out yet, maybe would increase your hard drive speed, but otherwise you're still buying the same 970, 980, 990 Pro from Samsung that you would have bought 3 or 4 years ago for hard drive speed. Moving on, Starfield 2, which I guess means there is a Starfield 2 in development. I really wasn't 100% believing that there would be one. It's going to be one hell of a game, according to an ex-Bethesda designer. The ex-designers compared the first game's mixed response to Assassin's Creed, which, if you're going to make that comparison, then I guess the assumption is Starfield 2 is just going to be a completely different game with loose connection to the first game. And I would say the comparison is probably not 100% similar in that I actually like Assassin's Creed 1 more than I like Assassin's Creed 2. There might be some quality of life improvements in Assassin's Creed 2, and the character might be a little bit more interesting in Assassin's Creed 2, but the actual story and experience overall of Assassin's Creed 1 I find preferable than Assassin's Creed 2. Now, inherently, I think the spin-offs of Assassin's Creed 2 kind of made it evolve more, although in kind of some bad ways also. And as you go further down the list of even the good Assassin's Creed games, it does just keep on changing and evolving into directions that isn't really what I wanted. But I don't think anybody, to get back to the comparison, is going to say they liked Starfield 1. Yep. And it is kind of crazy that an ex-Bethesda designer is singing the praise of Starfield when Bethesda themselves are not really singing the praises of Starfield, because they know they would just be laughed out of the room if they did. Inherently, I think Bethesda is just going to have a major shakeup at some point, in that Todd Howard just needs to retire and leave it to the next generation of people, and then the next generation of people need to step in and go, we're getting rid of the creation engine, we're getting rid of a lot of these established ways of doing things, and we're just not going to make Bethesda style games that made sense when I can't even, the last Elder Scrolls game came out. I can't even remember the name of the game. It's been sold so many times, I should know the name, but it slipped my mind. Yeah, Bethesda can't be making games like the last Elder Scrolls game, and like the last Fallout game, and like Starfield. Those are all games that are based on RPG mechanics that have not evolved in decades, and it's just doing more of what was acceptable decades ago is not acceptable in video games. It's something you could do in other forms of art where things don't evolve. You could tell almost the exact same kind of novel story. Stephen King can write a novel today exactly like he wrote a novel decades ago, and that'll sell. You cannot make a video game today in the same way that you would have made a video game decades ago and it sell. And Bethesda has just been sitting on a mountain of cash, being able to live that life for far too long. And I think you are going to have to get Todd Howard's vision out of there to move things forward, and you're just going to have to restructure everything, because clearly the structure is to make systems, not narrative, and you need somebody in there that's just going to bang the drum every day saying narrative first. We need games to feel good. We need characters that feel good, that people care about. We need writing that feels good. We need events and story that feels good. Nobody cares if you can collect 100 cans and put them into your ship in Starfield. You can do that in Starfield, and it just doesn't matter. What people are upset about Starfield, as far as its low quality, is that none of the characters are interesting, none of the plot is interesting, nothing happens. It is a bland game. Yep. And I guess that is why nobody who is still working at Bethesda is talking about Starfield, because it just set me off on a rant of just how terrible it is. And I haven't even played the game, and I already have fairly strong opinions about how bad it is. And that is a bad position to have your game in. I still haven't updated to get rid of the podcast announcements on gamedeveloper.com. I'll work on that at some point. And then this is older news, so it does look like we really did go through all of the new news. Today was also the first day where my macro actually finished itself, so I was finally able to tweak it. And it does seem like by significantly lowering the bitrate on the streaming here, I have slightly improved the situation. So now instead of dropping like 56% of frames, I'm dropping 46% of frames, which that seems to be insane that that's the case. Let's see. So 27 minutes ago, Epic says it's simplifying the Fortnite pass progression system. An hour ago, Black Ops 6 update released and known issues were detailed. And then 4 hours ago would have been when my macro started. So we got all of the news. It's just very little news has happened over the weekend. No surprise there. So yeah, and I really have nothing to say about Black Ops 6 update released with known issues being detailed. Check out this article, I guess, if you're interested, from Video Games Chronicle. And then Epic is simplifying its Fortnite pass progression system. All passes will progress with XP as festival points, battle stars, and studs are now being axed. Yeah, that is crazy to have that many different currencies in something like Fortnite. Alright, and then that's going to bring us to the Gamatsu articles. Venus Vacation Prism Dead or Alive Extreme has added Honka, and I guess we will watch the trailer for Honka and see if she is going to be the 5th girl, I believe, that just has giant butt and giant breast. It seems like that is going to be the case, although maybe there is slightly different style here. Yeah, it definitely is insane that they seem to have like an artist here. Oh, and it seems like they added a whole nother girl that I didn't even see. So these three are particularly side on, so you can definitely see the butt more. This one, slightly smaller butt. This one seems to be slightly smaller butt, but the busts are still way too big. Yeah. And I will have to just continuously lean on my theory here that either you have an artist here that has a very specific fetish in that they want one body type and one body model, and then they're just palette swapping different heads, different hair colors, or the more conspiracy thought would be that they have been given a mandate to make all of the characters look particularly developed, I guess, post-pubescent developed, in a effort to not get censored or be accused of depicting underage characters, which the final part on that thought would potentially get undercut if all of a sudden the ages start getting mentioned in the game, and like it starts saying, oh, this is a 16-year-old, this is an 18-year-old, this is a 15-year-old. This character almost certainly will be older, but you could say she was 25 and still make her fairly young. But yeah, visually, your mileage is going to vary drastically based on if you love that body type. Seems like you're going to get a lot of it, and if you don't, you won't probably play the game. This is an immersive romance adventure game that in the past the Dead or Alive Extreme series has been used to have hair physics jiggle and things like that improved, the way bodies flow and motions move, trying to reduce clipping and things like that. When you just go leans over, you can see there's some boob jiggle, and then it kind of squishes against itself more than it clips into itself. You can see the necklace here also not clipping. So there is actually a high level of technical detail that is being put into this, as far as jewelry and clothing being treated and working like jewelry and clothing should in the real world. Collarbones sinking in, hair falling forward when she leans forward. It is a lot of technical work to then be used either in Dead or Alive specifically, or to be used even in other games from the same company. And there's clearly a level of other Koei Tecmo games, I would imagine. There's clearly a love for doing these games, because at this point it's not probably necessary to have that high level of technical development just for Dead or Alive fighting games. Although fighting games inherently are showing off the bodies and the moves of characters, so the most realistic moves you can get, the better your game will look overall. Hunter x Hunter and Nin X Impact character trailer is available for Razer, and let's see if we can kind of show a comparison here of what a otherwise animation style, less realistic animation style, would look like. Yeah, if you're not going for the hyper realistic, and if you're just going for more crazy stuff, it's less necessary and possibly more difficult to get into those hyper level of details of muscles moving and things and bodies squashing. Inherently, I imagine fighting games want a punch to land on the face of another person and see the face deform on the other person. And up until this point, pretty much no fighting game can actually do that. It's usually just a bright light explosion that happens, or a generic recoil when you take damage. And Dead or Alive is really trying to get to that point. Of course, if they got really too realistic, it would probably look very awkward and more grotesque if you started to see actual fights. Like, it's one of the things that makes me not particularly interested in watching real world boxing or MMA, is that it just gets bloody, gory fast and awkward fast. It's often a lot of people on the ground grappling and struggling. It's not the cool anime-esque fighting sequences that you see in video games. And there is something to be said about enjoying fictional violence, but not enjoying actual trauma-inducing violence between even two consenting adult people. We already talked about Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete, launching December 3rd. Paid offline version of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. I imagine Animal Crossing people, since that's how all the other Animal Crossing games play, really wanted it in that form factor. This week's Japanese game releases are Dragon Age: The Veilguard, Pharmasia, and more. Let's see. So, looks to me like a slightly longer list. Although some of them are just PS5 and Switch versions. Yeah, that feels like a longer list. digitally, that's a fairly long list. There. There's a game called Redacted, or the game itself is called Redacted. No, the game is called Redacted. Interesting. Let's see. Well, there was just a sale on Steam for the Steins Gate visual novels. Now, Steins Gate Re:*Boot has been announced. Now, the problem with that is, from what little I understand around the Steins Gate story, which is very little, Re:*Boot may not actually be a reboot of the original, or a remaster or remake of the original Steins Gate visual novel. It may very well be the continuation of the story. Yeah. 15th anniversary concert. A reboot of the 2009 release science adventure series game Steins Gate. Reboot will feature new graphics and some additional story elements. So, it is going to be a case where it won't be exactly just a remaster of the first game, because it will add additional story elements. So some people may want to go back and play the original game still. And that feels like a very Japanese thing to do, is to say, we're not going to completely eliminate the thought that you might want to play the original games, or that there's some value in playing the original games, and instead we are going to change it just a little bit, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. The change inherently falls under the category of censorship as far as a remake, or in many people's minds. Whether it's actually just adding content or not, it's still changing things, and people don't like change. And yeah, since it's a visual novel, just new art really isn't going to be too much different from old art. Might be slightly better resolution, but if it's the same artist, maybe they're slightly better at animating things these days. I suspect this will be eaten up, although it may not also be released worldwide for a very long time. There may not be a English translation to it, and I don't think they're doing full animation. I don't think they're doing full voice acting, which still makes most visual novels, even one of the best received visual novels, very difficult as far as a sales pitch to Westerners. The mentality to appreciate and enjoy visual novels is just something that has not been sold to people. There'd have to be like a whole generation of kids in the West, and I don't know how they'd engage with visual novels when they're not engaging with manga. Manga has failed to really be prevalent enough. There is probably an alternate universe, which is apt to use that argument, where comic books got replaced with visual novels at their heyday, and so visual novels would just have been super popular for several decades. No, I mean comic books would have been replaced by manga, and manga would have been popular for several decades. And the newspapers themselves, instead of just falling into being irrelevant, the comic strip pages in a newspaper in some alternate universe could have included weekly comics from mangas like Shonen Jump, and then that would have just increased reading. I suppose if video games and electronics never existed, manga would have been way more popular. Of course, that wouldn't have really gotten you to appreciate visual novels at that point. And in fairness, if video games never existed, most manga and visual novels would be fairly different. The only thing I could think is on a small aspect, if you just absolutely forced kids to play visual novels very early and did not let them play anything. So like letting a kid play Super Mario Brothers, you're putting a visual novel in front of them. You might instill some love for visual novels that way, but probably not. You'd probably just create resentment and them hating video games as they know it. And inherently it's kind of impossible to give a game to a Western kid that requires that much reading early enough, because they just wouldn't want to read or wouldn't be capable of reading. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you really do it. Best case scenario, I imagine, is maybe you'd have a kid at about age 12 and you'd say you have to play one visual novel for every other kind of game. Like, just have a quota of visual novel games that they have to play before they can play any action games. And that would be weird, certainly. It'd be hard to pick out the visual novels that would be acceptable, really, because a lot of them would be like romance things and may have nudity in them. And that might be too permissive for Western parents. Certainly, probably is, just on the age ratings alone. It would help push your kid into being more into visual novels if it had nudity in it, instead of kids wanting to play violent games. So if your concern is just, I don't want my kid playing violent video games, visual novels are an alternative, but probably not the best one. And in a lot of ways, I hate to gender it, but I kind of feel like visual novels mostly just need to be pushed on like girls as more than even boys, because Western girls probably would play visual novels a lot more than Western boys would. At least that's my rough guess. But at best, I could imagine a Western parent could get a couple of visual novels played by their kids, and that's about it. You would just expose them to it and say, check these out. They'd be in a Steam library and you'd say, check them out. And that's about it. I don't think you're going to get them to be playing a different visual novel every month. I think they're going to be much more interested in just playing Mario games and things like that, more action-based games, even if they're not particularly violent. Mario Kart, things like that. And I think when you look at what Nintendo creates, that has created the desire. I don't know if it's a chicken and egg situation, but noticeably, Nintendo never really has made a visual novel game. The closest they've ever gotten to are the Paper Mario and Mario RPG series that have a lot of text in them. Pokemon has a decent amount of text in them too, but they never really have tried to just have a full-out visual novel game come out in the West, even though some of them have come for the Famicom, and I guess some visual novels of old are being re-released now on the Switch. Moving on, Fatal Fury City of Wolves adds Kim Dong-hwan. So here's another fighting game that has more of that cartoony art style. Let's see if we can skip forward. And yeah, the more 3D CGI cartoony art style is different from the more 2D cartoon art style we saw before, but it's still really not the kind of game that is going to such a hyper level of realism that Dead or Alive Extreme type games seem necessary. And yeah, you can see how all the contact here is getting blurred by electrical lightning elements. it is kind of amazing that pretty much every fighting game worth mention does something a little bit different to make it stand out differently. The Otome, that's Young Maiden visual novel, La Storia della Arcania Famiglia Renato, has been announced for Switch and PC. It is the ported version of the 2015 PS Vita release game. We are still getting Vita games getting ported. And I would imagine the Vita in particular, the Vita in particular was definitely a major pusher of more visual novel style games too in Japan. The Vita never really caught on or was given enough time to catch on in the West. But yeah, that is, I think, a big part of the difference there too. Although, and I just don't see how that would happen these days. You could certainly see like cell phone games that were more visual novel, but cell phones are so powerful now, and the desire for microtransaction is just so high that even though you could have a visual novel on cell phone games, I have not ever seen a visual novel have any success on cell phone games, on a cell phone as a platform. Yeah. I don't know anything about this specific game though, so we'll have to leave it at that. This was a shocking bit of news when I saw it. I thought this was like a late April Fool's Day joke or some kind of glitch, or just I was looking at some kind of old bit of news. But Killer 7 for PC, just without any announcement, put a major update out. It's taking remastered videos from the GameCube version and some graphics improvements, and it increases makes it easier to quick switch between the different characters. So there's just a casual, there's a quality of life improvements. All the videos now use WebM instead of OGV as a video version. All the remastered videos are based on the original GameCube videos. So I imagine this is just procedurally generated. 60 frames per second now for some reload animations. MSAA support using the config tool. Frame limiter support. Upscaled more of the fonts. Upscaled more textures. And they've added BC7 texture support. I'm not sure what that is. And then they enabled dots per inch awareness to allow proper 4K resolutions. It says please disable any DPI overrides. Quick character selects. I don't know who Kess Play Sunday is as a character, but her cutscenes are now skippable. I would imagine she's probably one of the bosses you fight in that game, because it basically is just a boss rush game on rails. It's a weird game that I played less than a year ago, really, for the first time. I imagine she plays cutscenes in the middle of her fight. They've replaced Xbox button references with dynamic button glyphs, so if you're playing with a PlayStation controller, you should see the right prompts, or at least keyboard and mouse prompts. They've removed references to the memory card, so they've already just changed quite a bit, and I would suspect that's because they were anticipating releasing this on the PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5. Maybe that's going to happen, maybe that fell through. But it also creates this weird situation where I still can't really recommend playing Killer 7 without first watching at least a few videos of what the gameplay actually looks like, because it is kind of a boring gameplay and its story is crazy and doesn't make any sense. It is a Suda51 joint, I believe. One of Suda51's first crazy games, and it's too crazy. Excuse me. And yeah, I definitely feel like it's a case where the Killer 7 came out for the PS2, I believe, at the right time to catch people's attention, but it's not enough of a thing. It's not a reinvention of how games can play. It's just a weird on-rail shooter game where you're just moving the mouse around, shooting, trying to find the right targets to shoot on. It would have been great as an arcade light gun game, but it just doesn't have relevancy as a modern game. Its story is insane. It's super crazy, which can be fun the first time, but definitely doesn't leave rooms for replays or sequels. It was pushing the edge quite a bit at the time, and so that probably caught a lot of people's attention, and it just didn't have a lot of competition there. Recent reviews here are mostly negative, and that's what I wanted to check out, is what would this game, it was a rated M for mature game, or it is an M for mature game now, and that on the PlayStation 2 I imagine had a major part of its sales pitch too, is just, you know, teenagers getting their hands on these games. But it's really only bloody, it's not really that explicit otherwise. It's definitely trying to ape things like Quentin Tarantino type movies, just having the F word said far too much. It's not even a particularly good trailer for depicting. See, so like this video here, I don't think is even a new comparison to the new graphics. I think this is the old remaster between the GameCube and the PC version. And I was I saying it was a PS2 game? Clearly it was a GameCube game, and so this would have also been the only game, or one of the few M for mature games. That enemy you fight very early in the game and has a specific weak spot that if you don't find it will give you, you'll never be able to go forward in the battle. But yeah, just absolute insanity in as far as the game is. So let's look at the reviews recently posted. Get rid of all the AI upscaled cutscenes, AI upscaling patch. PC version uses PS2 cutscenes initially, update claims to use GameCube cutscenes, is AI upscaled. I barely got to play this game and you already ruined it. AI upscaling for cutscenes has made the game look abysmal. Can't recommend any less. Go play the silver case. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yep. So begins the AI upscaling nonsense, it seems, in that you now are seeing games being AI upscaled and immediately seeing a pushback from the AI upscaling because they're just not good. Visuals were pretty rough for the game originally anyways. One of the biggest problems I would say with Killer 7 is it's got just far too many characters and it's way too demanding. Here, it's a Capcom, I guess it was a Capcom game at some point. It's NIS America being published now. There's just way too many characters, way too many backstories that you would have needed to try and cover, and way too many ideas. You have a character that's in a GIMP costume the whole time, and it just kind of goes nowhere. It's just surface level. And the game's not that long, so yeah, here's the GIMP costume character. What they needed to do is make a sequel, Killer 8 or something like that, or a remake of it, and just make the game a lot longer, go into the backstory of each character for whatever real backstory you can give for each character, have an actual plot overall. Otherwise, what this game probably was a lot of leftover content or ideas that were half baked, that maybe were created while somebody was baked on marijuana, and just thrown together in a very short amount of time. And because it went extreme and because it had a lot of blood and some sexual overtones to it, it got a lot more attention on the GameCube than it really deserved. But I guess if you're a new content creator, maybe that works. It certainly worked in the past. I'm not sure it works today in the era of censorship. If you tried to do that on YouTube, then you'd be like MXR, who's now banned from YouTube, or so many other people banned from Twitch and YouTube. But yeah, at some point, just going extreme gets people's attention. Quentin Tarantino, prime example of that, probably wouldn't be a director even worth mentioning had he not gone extreme in his early movies to catch people's attention. Nobody talks about the director of like Homeward Bound or something simplistic like that. Or even really, people don't talk about directors of Marvel movies because they're so made by committee and generic. Moving on, Sonic X Shadow Generation sales have topped 1 million. It launched today for consoles and PC. We definitely are going to see a case where more and more companies are going to experiment with AI upscaling. But we may not see too much of it because I doubt Microsoft or PlayStation is going to really require AI upscaling for games to be released. And if it is going to be AI upscaling that's used, it's going to be built into the hardware itself. It's going to be deep learning super sampling, DLSS style of upscaling, which is temporal upscaling instead of AI upscaling, and it will be something that the player can turn on and off at their own desire instead of having something baked in by running it through an AI large language module algorithm and trying to upscale it that way. Moving on, Shadow Tactics Blade of the Shokan has Aiko's Choice. It's the subheadline. It's coming to PS5, Xbox Series on December 6th. It's a stealth strategy game currently available for PC. The funny thing about it is I don't recognize this game, even though I put it on the wish list. I would assume there's this stealth strategy game called Shadow Tactics, And this is a spin-off game, and it came out in 2021, and it's rated very positively. Let's see. Shadow Tactics Anniversary Bundle includes Shadow Tactics Blades of the Shogun, which is overwhelmingly positive. Also, and then some DLC for both games. And that too is on my wish list. In fairness, though, while this is a game I might play, it's definitely not the kind of game that I would just be super excited to play. This visual style, this far zoomed out, is not really what I'm looking for with my eyesight getting worse. Maybe I'll finally get my monitor closer to my eyes to adjust to fix that, but yeah. Not really the type of game that would get me super excited. Maybe I would love it. Maybe not. It is probably worth mentioning, though, that here you have a female character as your protagonist. Standalone female character as a protagonist from Daedalic and Mimi Entertainment. And seemingly there was zero controversy around that at all. Like, nobody complained about it. Nothing at all happened. Like, I don't recall any kind of controversy like that happening. So when we look at Assassin's Creed Shadow, which I believe is the name of the Ninja Assassin's Creed game that has been announced, it's not just that. It's, I think, partially that, maybe. Might also be a case that the Japanese audience, who have been most vocal about hating Assassin's Creed Shadow, maybe don't know this game. But I just assume that they don't try, they didn't try in their advertisement to make her feel like a ninja. She doesn't really look like she's dressed like a ninja. And they didn't try to have any historical characters that happen to be of African descent be a protagonist. I think that is Assassin's Creed Shadow's main problem, is that you have a French company here trying to be far too woke by having both a black samurai and a female, not shinobi, I forget what they're actually called, a female equivalent to a ninja but not called a ninja, but they are kind of calling her a ninja, even though that wouldn't be the word that the Japanese would use. So just really historically inaccurate from the beginning, and having nothing else to really show other than doubling down on parts that the Japanese audience were not happy about. Meanwhile, this game is coming out, and it will be very interesting to see the sales of this number of this game compared to the sales of Assassin's Creed Shadow, because we can make a fairly one-to-one comparison. Although Assassin's Creed Shadow, if that really is the name of it, really needs to sell a lot more and have a much larger audience, because it's a more visually polished game and, well, undoubtedly spent a lot more money in development. Resident Evil 2, 3, and 7 gold editions for PS5 physical editions have been announced. Noticeably, we're getting fairly long in the tooth since the last either Resident Evil game at the end of the number series or a reboot of the series. So feels like it's about time to either announce a Resident Evil 8 if 8 hasn't already been made, or Resident Evil 5 remake, which I still have no clue what they're really going to do with the Resident Evil 5 remake. Yeah. At a certain level, it almost makes sense to make a Resident Evil 5 remake that is a completely different game than Resident Evil 5 and create some kind of connective tissue between the remakes and a Resident Evil 7. But they probably are better off just doing nothing. So now we're going through the gaming on Linux. I still haven't made an interstitial image there, and I think I should do that. Albion Online Horizon updates brings customizable heads-up display and more dynamic world. I am noticing Gaming on Linux talks about individual games a little bit more. Save and Sound is a big live show celebrating music in the gaming industry that's coming in November. It's a live online musical festival. Interesting. I've never really considered the idea of just watching a live stream or even watching it later of music in video game. In a funny way, there probably should be more online concerts overall, and since you can't get like Aerosmith to do an online concert because they need the money and their production companies would never let them do something like that. Like theoretically, if they weren't under some kind of contract, you would think most artists would just go onto their own personal YouTube channels and sing a song every now and then, but I've never seen an artist actually sing a full song or do any kind of like production. It's interesting, it's a 2-night event. So I'm trying to figure out who the bands are. It doesn't seem like there's actual bands or orchestra being mentioned here. So instead it's just over the course of quite a few hours, like 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It seems like they might just be playing the audio directly from the games that's from the original creators instead of doing their own covers of them. And certainly that's a different way to promote your game. And it's gonna have a festival on Steam, so it's an interesting thought. But I would say, as somebody who's not very good at being able to hear and understand music, someone who's tone deaf, it's not how I think I would ever want to listen to game music. If I'm not playing a game, I don't want to listen to the game music. There's not a single song I would want to hear from any video game that comes to mind. If anything, I would go back and listen to anime songs before I would listen to video game music, because at least then you might have an episodic anime TV series or just TV series in general that has a catchy tune that you hear before or after every episode of a TV series, episodic series. And that could be a bit of an earworm and go back and listen to that. But even then, I don't do that, because if I'm going to listen to music from an anime series or a TV series, then I want to watch the TV series. Same thing would be the case here. If I'm going to listen to music from a video game, I just want to go and play that video game. It would make a lot more sense for musicians like Aerosmith to just pick a random band. I'm not sure Aerosmith even still exists. It'd make a lot more sense if they had streaming concerts, because their music is very much standalone. And I have sat through watching TV shows of concerts before. So that's something I could do on occasion. But yeah. Video games are inherently just, the music is inherently connected to the game. Also, music in video games is inherently designed to be less stage front. Anyways, it's not usually the songs that you're supposed to be 100% paying attention to in a video game. The songs are supposed to be more in the background, just keeping you interested and keeping you high energy while playing a game. Yeah. But it's an interesting things. Apparently Portal fans may want to try the demo for Total Reload. So let's watch this trailer and see how much I, as a Portal fan, feel like this is a Portal-inspired fan game. You control the body of artificial intelligence. This game is coming out January 15th, 2025. Okay, it definitely has kind of that white minimalistic art style to it. Although a lot of this feels more Talos Principle with the text, assuming the text is actually here in the final game. So what it seems to me like is you're probably jumping around controlling different bodies. And there's a lot of games like this where you're controlling different kinds of elements, and at a certain level you realize that more modern 3D puzzle games need to embrace more gameplay mechanics than what Portal did, in part because Portal just had the money and the developers to polish the Portal concept down to be good enough for an entire game's length, 2 games lengths. But that's about it. Noticeably, they haven't made a Portal 3, and it would be very difficult to find a whole nother 20 hours even of Portal style gameplay. Even Portal 2 introduced new gameplay mechanics, because the basic place portal here, place portal there gameplay had dried up. Even Portal 1 has the cubes and the buttons and several other elements. This game, Total Reload, looks fine, but it actually doesn't look like it involves portals at all. I think it's a misunderstanding of what these are. I think these are sucking the AI out of the brains of robot bodies and putting it into other robot bodies, or maybe sucking the entire body and putting it in a different place. So while it technically might be a portal that's putting you from point A to point B, it might as well also just be a door. I think you're never really going to get to place these portals like you would in the actual Portal game. A co-op dungeon crawler called Barony gets a big free expansion with the Keep Your Secrets update. This does not look like a game that would particularly catch my attention. It's just too pixely. Yep. So I'm going to leave it at that and move on. A complex 2D train management sim called Iron Roads hits early access in January 2025. Again, not a game that visually looks that interesting. Of course, these are Linux compatible games, so there's some benefit there. I'm also noticing that just slowly over time, the number of drop frames percentage-wise is decreasing. So I should keep an eye out to see if at the current setting I'm dropping any frames. Actually, I don't really need to do that, do I? I can just hit the reset button and see what happens there. See if I drop any frames going forward. Resetting the stats. So I may have finally gotten it down. Something about my network seemed to finally fix itself, and I wonder if anything of that had to do with what I was doing. But yeah, the question now is the quality just significantly worse in the live streams, and it may very well be. Yeah, and I'm still seeing fairly large drops in frame rates even now. It's just not very consistent, and there's just nothing going on my network right now at all to justify that. Of course, I'm sure most people don't care either. Factoria Space Age has sold over 400,000 copies and set a new player record count, I assume for itself and not overall. So I'm not sure if Factorio was ever in space before. I feel like it was probably that you landed on a planet and then had to stay on that planet. So it hit a peak of 118,674 players. Its previous peak was only 34,700 back in 2020, which that in particular may just speak to how many more people are playing on PC these days compared to even 4 years ago. The open source evolution survival sim called Thrive has a version 0.7.1 release, which they're calling a full-featured release. Although, if it was truly full-featured, you think it would be a 1.0 version. Then you can check out the classic CRPG inspired Passageway of the Ancients, which is out now. Yeah, I don't think classic CRPGs ever catch my attention. One of the things about Torchlight 2 that's kind of nice is that there's a whole statistics page that the game never really even tells you to go look at. It gives you some information, certainly, but you don't really need to look at it, at least playing on easy. It's just trying to... Torchlight, weirdly, is trying to be more of a console version of a Diablo game, but also weirdly does not have controller support for the Steam versions, Torchlight 2 in particular, which just seems crazy. Because yeah, it's more cartoony, it's more kid-friendly looking, and it's just easier overall. And I kind of appreciate that. That there would be a Diablo light style of game. And even now, Diablo 4, if you could make a light version of that where it doesn't reset my character, I would be more than happy to play Diablo 4 if there was just a persistent mode and an easy mode. If I didn't have to potentially put 200 hours into it to get to the credits. That's my main concerns with Diablo 4. I can put up with perhaps a lot of vendor trash. I can put up with a lot of repetition, but losing progress is not acceptable. The Steam beta has removed the option to globally disable Steam Play, plus it has added game recording improvements. That sounds like a bad thing, but inherently what they've done is remove the button because the button wasn't doing anything. Steam Play is always enabled on Linux, so this is just fixing an inaccurate display, and the beta is just generally fixing things all together. It's just correctly reflecting that Steam Play is always enabled on Linux. Steam Play was partially active even when you set it to off in the UI as a requirement for the Steam client operation. Yeah. I think we are back to the point where the Steam beta updates are going to be small fixes, and it'll probably be at least a couple of months before we start to see a major function or feature added to Steam. If they went mostly to just fixing things for a Steam OS version 4 to be released, that might not be a terrible idea, because there are a lot of major things that do need to be improved in a SteamOS version 4, in that they more than likely need to pivot everything over to Wayland instead of having X11 on the desktop mode, and through Proton. They need to have direct PC support, I think, when they release SteamOS version 4, and not just partial support for the ROG Ally X and a few other portable computers. KDE desktop mode needs to go to version 6 so it can also support Wayland. There's printer support needs to be enabled in some way on desktop mode still. Better implementation of tiling windows through KDE version 6 to work with the pop-up keyboard in desktop mode. Overall, just better support for games will be their main focus, so that will happen no matter what. But yeah, there's major software improvements or just updates to newer versions of software that SteamOS version 4 needs to do, on top of supporting general x86 AMD 64 style computers, pre-built computers, and custom built computers. House Flipper VR, and various DLCs are available from the Humble Bundle, which, if I wasn't so broke right now, I would definitely consider that. It's been a long time since I bought a Humble Bundle. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say most people should have House Flipper as a thing, because it's a good game to be somewhat kid friendly. Is this page gonna load or not? Guess not. Yeah, it's a pretty good kid-friendly type experience. See, and trying to load that page alone seems to have caused some frame drops, network frame drops. So it does just feel like there's something on my network, even internally, well, might be clogged. I don't know what though. Just don't know what. I need to investigate that, make sure there isn't something hacked or something going on. Let's see. Moving on, the latest free Prime games with Prime Gaming. Lots of Steam Deck and Linux games. all of them Amazon or Epic or Good Old Games. Inherently though, getting Prime Gaming means having an Amazon Prime account, which maybe gets you Prime Video, and maybe you think Prime Video is worth it, but it's kind of hard to justify that with the commercials now, and it definitely encourages people to spend more money. I can testify to that personally on Amazon.com. So if you were buying a bunch of stuff from Amazon.com, Prime almost certainly makes sense. But if you weren't, if you're more broke than that and you're just not buying stuff in general, yeah, getting Prime games or getting Prime just for the games is definitely not worth it. Particularly since none of them are Steam codes, and you still very much are in the case where you can't really get all the games you want to play just through Good Old Games, or just through Amazon, or just through Epic. You can get some of the spooky games in Fantastical's Prestige Collection 3rd edition bundle. Not sure if this is actually a humble bundle or not. There is some level of curation that I could perhaps do on Gaming on Linux to not highlight Linux games in particular that are on sale, but it's probably not that big of a deal. Sonic X Shadow Generations has been released and is Steam Deck verified. Some of these stories also may be older. Rockstar Games Launcher gets updated for Steam Deck. You still can't play GTA Online though on Linux. Deadlock got some visual updates. This is an older story. Potato added 4-player local co-op and Abyssal Terrors DLC. Slay the Princess Review. Croc Legend Remaster will be a Good Old Games exclusive. Yeah, Steam OS 3.6 is officially out. I can see them skipping directly from 3.6 to 4.0. Yep. Yep. The Nimrod's Guncraft Survivor. It's another game that they're kind of promoting. Some of these articles definitely feel like commercials more than anything. That'll bring us to GameDeveloper.com, but I don't think any of these stories are too new, like 2 minutes. Yeah. The SAG-AFTRA strike will continue after the union concludes the latest talks with major game studios. Free-to-play version of Animal Crossing is becoming a $20 premium game. US copyright law we talked about, rejecting a DMCA exemption. Yep. Trying to open all of these articles myself is a pain because the text is not set up to be particularly readable. So let's open a couple of these GameDeveloper.com articles and then assume we've read all the other articles, because I'm sure we have. And that page loaded without causing any major network problems. Microsoft CEO says Xbox is intent on manifesting a multiplayer platform. This is old. Sonic X Shadow Generation sells over 1 million copies at launch. 20 Xbox franchises have made $1 billion in the lifetime revenue, says Microsoft CEO. More Xbox first-party series have become big earners for Microsoft, many of which come from studios they've acquired in recent years. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if 13 out of the 20 games in that list are acquired games, not first-party games that were developed from internal studios at Xbox. Maybe all 20 of them are. And 1 billion in lifetime revenue could be stretched around a very long period of time. A lot of that money may not have ever made its way into Microsoft's hand. For instance, World of Warcraft, for instance, owned by Activision Blizzard, almost certainly made $1 billion in lifetime revenue. How much of that money has been given to Microsoft? Basically none of it. A couple months of the most recent World of Warcraft subscriptions alone. Yep, we already talked about the Copyright Office rejecting DMCA exemptions. I imagine they won't consider it again for a while. And GameDeveloper.com using the same image that they've used several times before. It seems like they just have a default, this is what a library looks like image they use. But they probably should shake it up and have multiple images on display. Yep. The free-to-play version of Animal Crossing is becoming a $20 premium release. And then that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, which we will start to go through this. Now, my one concern with the macro, even though it did actually make it all the way to the end today, is that it isn't actively running the curation correctly. My thought there is that it's very possible that it's only getting the most recent Steam page and just looking at the most recent Steam page over and over again. It was doing that for a while. The hope would be it isn't doing that. And I guess the way to tell if it's doing that or not is to keep an eye out for any adult games slipping through the curation in this list. And so we will just see. And the visuals here are just not quite good enough. Still not running anything with the new macro as far as a fall list cleanup. And as I try to think of new ways to adjust my schedule, so this is an office shooting, the Office is Full of Zombies game, office shooting simulator. Yeah, as I try to think about the schedule though, is what can I accomplish more on these days after I live stream? Because when I live stream it's fairly early, but then that is pretty much just the end of the day. So either I need my macros to make YouTube shorts for the rest of the day and take the day off, the rest of the day off, which is taking too much time off, or I need to figure out something else. And I am definitely raising my bladder at this point as far as can I get through all of these games before I have to just run off to the bathroom. Seeing a slight increase in horror games right around the Halloween era. We're still seeing a Halloween days. Still seeing an increase in Japanese only games, which is somewhat inspiring, not helpful, but it is nice to see that there's less, I guess, Western desire and appeal to, well, it's not less Western appeal, there's more Eastern and more Japanese appeal to listing things on PC. I guess the big question is, what would be the next step to getting something like the Steam Deck to be accepted in Japan and purchased in large amounts? Because noticeably, we aren't seeing through the Gematsu sales, when we do have Gematsu sales listed, or the Famitsu sales in particular, I think it's Famitsu that has the sales numbers that are getting re-reported by Gematsu. They don't mention Steam Decks. It's just not being counted. They don't mention PCs in general. So the question is, can Valve do anything to convince Famitsu to run those numbers? Or can some new company list those numbers that people would actually care about? Yeah, I still don't think that's a game. Yeah, I will admit that I'm probably more cruel to something that looks like an RPG Maker game than I am to an asset flip horror game. Because asset flip horror games potentially could be something. Probably aren't. But they could be something. Yeah, specifically on the follow list cleanup though, I need to just run it right after every live stream. That more than likely should be part of my daily work. Not do it on video. Here we do have one adult game that slipped through, or at least with the adult tags. Yep. Sewing machine simulator, that's weird. Yep. I won't have that kind of accountability if I don't do the follow list cleanup on the live stream, but yeah, the quality of doing the follow list cleanup on the live stream is also not very high. If I was really trying hard and felt like I could improve anything at the moment on these live streams, I would be working myself back into a hyper focus of what can I do to, yeah, what is the thing I can do to increase my watch time? I'm not sure what I can do. What can I change without just drastically changing everything? And just making completely different content. It's really just a matter of I don't have enough viewers and I don't have enough feedback to even begin to see. If something is going to be video game news, if we're going to go through video game news, what's a better way to do that? What makes what I'm doing uninteresting enough that people leave after, even if it is just 5 minutes or so? one would assume that the first 5 minutes there of my experience, the rambling warm-ups, have to go. Yeah, almost certainly that is the case. And I guess if I just had normal pre-recording options here, I probably would edit myself out. I could potentially do some of that too, is not start recording or pause recording whenever going on to ramble, but that would be a lot of jump cuts. That's about all I could do. It's just like, oh, I'm gonna start talking about something, let me just pause it, talk about it to myself and no one else, and then unpause the pre-recording, then upload the recording. You can't really do that when you're live. Here's another one of these Japanese, probably visual novels that pretty obviously would be showing more cleavage. You just don't make 2D characters with those big of busts without there being some nudity uncensored patch to show just a ton more cleavage than what this censored version of this game is. I'm still not 100% sure I agree with the idea of releasing a game in a censored version, particularly when the uncensored version is then more difficult to find or impossible to find, particularly since that was obviously a focus of the artistic creator. Yeah. But yeah, I can also see why you might have a toggle. Here we have yet another adult game, or a game with adult tags at least. It broke through. So yeah, I am certain that the macro now is not updating correctly. Maybe it's opening 2 pages, 2 Steam pages instead of 1 at a time, and then only curating 1. That was a almost direct Metroidvania ripoff, which in fairness, a direct Metroidvania ripoff isn't the worst idea. Being fairly generous today. Alright, well, that would normally be the end of the show. I do want to show off a couple other stories, though, that I managed to not deal with. Still using Twitter/X. There's no good replacement, but one of the sources that I decided to start following is Are Black Hairstyles in Game, and then they highlight games that have different types of hairstyles that are traditionally of the African descent. Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred adds at least 5 black hairstyles to the game, and we'll look at them now. First and foremost, though, if this is about better representation, which I assume it is worth pointing out that there are some traditionally negative stereotypes still being shown here as far as the character class, and maybe that is not that offensive to African people, or maybe it's even somewhat accurate to some tribes of Africa, but the vast majority of African people in modern days, and Diablo 4 is probably not set in modern days, but the vast majority of people in Africa are not wearing leather. They don't have a bone through the nose, even if it is a curved bone. They don't have bones in their ears. So yeah, Africa being just a very diverse place, you're going to fall into a stereotype trying practically anything. As for the actual hairstyle, this is interesting. I'm not sure though that this kind of curly weave tube is something I've seen a lot of. This too. This feels like somebody has gone to a hairdresser to get these kinds of hairs. These are not what you actually naturally would have or be able to have and maintain. Of course, I'm no expert. This one's perhaps closer to something you can naturally have and maintain. And this one is something I imagine you could have and maintain a little bit more. The question I would also ask is, are these exclusive to the African descent looking characters? Or can any character have those hairstyles if they want it? And that's pretty much all this Twitter is here's different hairstyles. Of course, you run into a problem here with, I imagine this is NBA 2K. No, this is in zone. You have a gendered element here in that maybe male presenting characters can't have this hairstyle and female presenting characters can't have this hairstyle. And at a certain point there's almost an argument as far as skin tone shades being a little bit more prevalent. And then if you're talking about other games that are pixely, that's just feels different. It is a one-note Twitter account, certainly, but perhaps highlighting something that needs to be highlighted. And they haven't actually tweeted too much. Like the last time I really caught their attention was, I actually saw their post was way back in June 9th. So it seems like they probably are starting out with working small and working their way up. What's funny is they're highlighting this game Sunnyside, but then Sunnyside's thumbnail clearly not showing a black-skinned character, dark-skinned character, and honestly it looks like it's set in Japan from the looks of it, where that wouldn't happen too much. Or then I guess your opinions may vary as far as if you're playing as vampires in V Rising, whether you're as concerned about that. I bet this goes back a lot further than I'm willing to scroll. In a lot of ways, the question is more, are curly hairstyles in the game? Because people of African descent hairstyles tend to be curly. I've never seen anybody with that hairstyle. And depending on the style of the animation, that can be done easily or that can take a lot of extra work. But anyways, the other thing I wanted to show off, actually I have several things here, I'm just going to go through them and hope nothing's too offensive, was that to little fanfare, a new game plus has been added to Dead Island 2. Pretty much everyone has forgotten about Dead Island 2. And it seems to me with the new game plus, they are reintroducing at least 3 out of the 4 characters from the first game, although they all look like they've just been reanimated differently. So my thought is that this was a playable character in the first game, this was a playable character in the first game, and Yeah, I would suspect maybe this was a playable character, and maybe this was a playable character. Although it seems like maybe one character has been left out at some point here, because if this, and this were all from the first game, and I know there were 4 playables in this, then only this and this would be playable characters from the previous game. Although maybe all of these characters are just DLC characters that were added later. Or I could be completely wrong and none of these characters were from the first Dead Island. But yeah, they're not putting all that fanfare around it, and they really needed to push hard with Dead Island 2 to make it popular, and push hard to try and make people forget about things like Dead Island Riptide and the remakes and remasters and the just poor experience overall of how Dead Island as a series has been treated. Of course, anybody in the know would have just moved over from Dead Island to Dying Light 1, which still I imagine is way better of a game than Dead Island 2 is. Let's see, what was I looking at in NIS America? This was the remasters, which we now seem to have a consensus from consumers that are AI upscaled. And then I have no idea why I would have had anything cooked on from the Epic Games Store. Oh, they put out a hands-on article from the Epic Games Store around Infinity Nikki. Definitely trying to promote it more. I hope that the game will come to Steam at some point, because it is definitely based off of a dress-up game series, definitely targeting girls more, and seems to have been done fairly well. Not hearing any major complaints around it. Just always looking for new, more female-centric games. Yeah. And then Genshin Impact is coming to Xbox, apparently. And so they're considering that a big deal. It probably will be. And then Censored Gaming has disappeared on Twitter and just disappeared on YouTube. But Refused Classification, which is focused specifically on games being censored in Australia, has several things to say in Censored Gaming's absence. Seems like Australia is going through a back catalog and just having a whole new phase of censorship go on. So Alice Madness Returns from EA has been banned in Australia under the automatic IARC global rating tool, which, yeah, it was rated MA in 2011. This might be a case where you had to re-notify your games, recertify your games through the IARC global rating tool, and EA just did not bother to do it. And that might be the case, is that we're just running into an issue where things are getting refused classification because they didn't update the information. On the other hand, you could try to be more hopeful on this and see that this version is multi-platform, where this is non-specified. So this might be a refused classification of an Alice Madness Returns for, it could be the PS4, could be the Xbox Series X, could be the Switch, could be the Switch 2, might even be for PC. So if this was a new version of Alice Madness Returns, that would be cool. There's a current proposal to set the minimum age for social media flips the solution by determining what online spaces children can occupy. Similar to the filter, it also makes the decisions on parents' behalf. So, new proposal from more restrictive rules in Australia. Sites hosting adult content could be removed from search results and blocked from linking on social media in Australia unless they verify the ages of users trying to access them under a draft industry code released on Tuesday. So again, you'd have to, in Australia, submit personally identifiable information that could be used against you to prove that you are over age. They've ordered a new review on a book called Gender Queer also, so it's kind of quite a lot here. A national social media age verification scheme being proposed. So there was an election, I believe, a few months ago in Australia, and now it seems like the new people in charge are as much, if not worse, as far as censorship goes in Australia. Free TV is proposing to expand daytime hours for M-rated content. Currently, M-rated content can screen between 7:30 p.m. to 6 a.m. and 12 to 3 p.m. on school days, but the new proposal would widen the daytime to 10 a.m. to 3 a.m. regardless of school days or weekends. 3 p.m. I wonder how many kids in Australia are watching free TV now. So, see if there's any more video games. It's clear from the complete lack of detail attending the Prime Minister's commitment to yet more internet censorship that the government has no idea how to produce anything other than yet another silly voluntary filter. This is September 21st, and I guess this is a quote from somebody. Minimal classification for games with gambling in them, September 21st. Yeah, new people were reappointed until the 5th of December 2025, so new people put in charge basically. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of censorship going on there in Australia, but there kind of always was. Australia, one of the most restrictive countries that has any real allowance for video games that you would, Western style countries that you would expect wouldn't have that level of censorship, but does. Alright, and I did see that still dropping frames somewhat, not anywhere as bad, but still dropping frames. So either I'm going to have to figure out if something's going on in my network, or I'm going to have to just restrict the amount of bandwidth to a ridiculously small amount for these live streams going forward, because this is just not working. Alright, well, this is going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.